GoPro has just released another new firmware update for the Hero 10. This firmware version is 1.30 and it was released on January 27th, 2022. And unlike previous firmware updates for this camera, there are no new features that GoPro advertises with this firmware. Instead, GoPro states this firmware offers usability improvements, including general bug fixes and user interface improvements. So initially, that's not the most exciting sounding firmware, of course. We've been used to GoPro offering a lot of new features with their firmware so far. And some of those features include the performance modes that help you adjust the camera easily in order to accommodate for indoor or stationary use if you want to prevent overheating on this camera. So that was a big thing. Instead of you having to manually plug in those settings, you could simply switch to the stationary tripod mode and the camera would automatically tweak those settings so that you would get best performance with the lowest risk of overheating indoors. In addition, GoPro pushed out several new frame rates for the 5.3K, the 5.3K 4x3, the 4K, and the 4K 4x3. Some of those frame rates were not initially there when the camera was released, so it was great to get those. And then GoPro also did push out the max lens mod support, and that feature was a very high demand one. A lot of people wanted to know why that wasn't there in the 10 when it was released, and GoPro did get that released back in December with firmware version 1.20 officially. So now that this camera supports all of those features, it makes sense that GoPro is now focusing on fixing any bugs that have been reported to them, and also working on improving and tweaking this camera so that it performs as well as possible. So I do appreciate that about this firmware update. And if you don't have those firmware updates, then 1.3 would be a major update for you, because the 1.3 update includes all of the features and fixes that were available in the 1.2 and then the firmware update before then back in November. So definitely update the firmware if you haven't already on your Hero 10. It's going to give you the latest and greatest features, and it's also going to help you ensure your camera works as well as possible. And if you haven't updated the firmware on your GoPro before, I recently created a video that shows you how to do this with the Quick app, and also shows you how to do this with the manual method in case the Quick app does not work for you. I've linked to that video above. I definitely encourage you to check it out. It will definitely help make the firmware update process much easier if you're not familiar with it already. Now, I did install firmware version 1.3 on here yesterday, and I've used the Hero 10 today, and so far I've not noticed any differences. But at the same time, I wasn't having any problems with this camera before firmware 1.3. So if you were having problems with the Hero 10, I definitely recommend installing 1.3 and then seeing if those problems are gone now. Though I am curious what bug fixes and interface improvements GoPro offered. GoPro typically doesn't go into detail on what those bug fixes are unless it was something that was a really big deal, like the overheating, where a certain percentage of users were having that issue. GoPro did go into detail on that. But otherwise, GoPro typically doesn't go into detail on that. But it would be interesting to know what those bug fixes and performance increases are. So if you do notice that firmware 1.3 fixes a bug for you, or has any changes for you in the interface, definitely let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your feedback on that. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already subscribed, please hit the subscribe and bell notification button, and you'll be notified every time I publish a new video. Until we talk again, happy GoProing.